Hi everybody. So here's a new tutorial which uses a different approach to creating very interesting objects in Blender, like for instance this hip implant. And I'm going to introduce a new tool, lofting and bridging tool, for use in perhaps subsequent machine design or part design. Okay, so we're going to start from scratch, and I'm going to create the shaft, and then I'm going to create the lofted surface, and then I'm going to attach this cylinder to the top of the surface. So I'm going to go back to factory settings, and I'll delete the cube, delete, enter, so the cube is gone. Before I do anything, I'm going to enable an add-on, and this is a very exciting add-on. I'm going to go to User Preferences, and I'm going to go to Add-ons, and I'm going to go to Mesh, and I'm going to enable the Loop Tools add-on, Mesh Loop Tools add-on. All right. I'm going to save it as default, and now the Loop Tools are now added. We'll use that later. Okay. So let's go to a top view. I'm going to hit the 7 button on the numeric keypad. I could use the view top. Same thing. I'm going to add a circle. And the circle is a unit 1. Hit the N key to view its properties. I think that I always like to increase the lens to around 100, 70, 100, anything you want. And then I'll use the scroll mouse to zoom back out. That just helps with the perspective. And now I'm going to create the shaft of implants. All right, so we'll go to object mode, we'll go to edit mode, and then I'll select lines, edge select mode, extrude in the Z-axis, and I'll extrude a small amount, left click, E for extrude, Z for Z-axis, left click, E for extrude, Z-axis. I need a few of these curves here so that I can create a nice smooth shape at the bottom. E for extrude, Z-axis again, E for extrude, and I'm going to extrude the rest of the shaft. Let's figure this is probably long enough. Z for Z-axis, and that's probably good enough. Okay, so now I have a shaft. And now I have to configure the bottom end of the shaft so it has a curved nature. So A for deselect all. I'm going to right click. I have the edges selected. I'm going to right click on the edge and select the loop, and I'm going to merge and collapse the loop. I can use the merge command from here on this menu item and collapse, and now I have a collapsed loop. Now I'm going to go ahead and select this edge, hello, the loop, and I'm going to scale it. That looks pretty good for starters. And I'm going to go ahead and select this loop. And perhaps I'll move it down a bit and then scale it. Reasonable. Okay. And then I'm going to go ahead and select this loop. And I'll move it down a bit. And now I'm going to go to the vertex selection mode. I'll hit the A button first to deselect everything. Vertex selection mode. Select that vertex, and I'll move it up. And now I have pretty reasonable bottom curvature for this shaft. Okay, that's fine for now. Now, just for the heck of it, I'm going to go ahead and add a ring in this region so that I can use it to use for control later. Control R, and there's my ring. I hit the select button. I can move it along the shaft, and I'll just maybe put it here. So now I have subdivided this mesh, and I have a pretty reasonable shaft for my implant. Okay, so the next thing to do is to create the elliptical region that we're going to use for the upper part of the implant. So let's go to a top view. And just with the heck of it, I'll do it this way. Top view, shift middle button, pan over a bit so that I have some area to work in. And I'm going to add a plane. Might as well position the 3D cursor here. I'm going to add a plane. I'm going to scale it in the X direction. I want it to be approximately this large. And then we're going to subdivide it by 1. I'm going to have to go into edit mode and subdivide it by 1, because what we don't want it to be a perfect rectangle. We want it to be kind of a curvy object. So let's go ahead and apply the modifier. I'm going to give myself a little bit of room here. And I'm going to apply a modifier, subdivision surfaces. And we can see the modifier at this time. I should actually be doing this in object mode. That's fine. And I'm going to increase the view, but first, before I increase the view, I'm going to hit the Z button so that I can see the mesh that I'm creating with the subdivide surfaces. But I'm going to use 2. Okay. So as you can see now, instead of just a rectangle, I have a nicely semi-elliptical rectangular object. And I'm going to hit apply and apply that surface. So if I use the middle mouse button, I can see that I have a new surface. Now, I'm going to move that surface up, zoom out with the middle rotation button, move it out, reposition it, and in fact, I'm going to reposition it using textual input 0, tab, 0, tab. Enter. Okay. So now it's positioned exactly above the cylinder. And I'm going to move it up a bit because I'm trying to reproduce the implant shape, and probably somewhere around there. And I've already measured this from implants on the images on the internet, and it looks like about 30 degrees is a reasonable rotation. So I'm going to rotate this object by 30 degrees. Okay. Then I'm going to move it out because I also know from looking at images that the lateral part of the implant is pretty linear. So I'm going to continue to move it out. Maybe I'll orient myself so I can see better. Use the shift key and pan. And I'll orient it out. And okay, so maybe this is a bit too big. I'm going to scale it down. Use the S key. Scale it down a bit. Move it over. And I think that if I think about the curvature here, I think it's going to work. Okay. So now I have an elliptical object. And in fact, I'm actually going to scale it a bit in the Y direction. S, scale, Y, fix in the Y, and make it a little bit larger in the Y direction. Left click to fix that scale, and I think I have a pretty good surface here for combining with this cylindrical surface. And now we're going to use the loop tools. But before we do that, we have to select these surfaces. We have to join these objects and then select the surface. So let's join the objects. Now, we want to join the objects such that this cylinder is the primary object. So with this selected, if I hold in object mode, if I hold the shift key down and I select left click to select the cylinder, now the cylinder is the primary object, but they're both selected. And now I'm going to join them. Object, join. They become one object that I can now use in edit mode. Okay, so let's go into edit mode. And what we need to do is we need to select the loop and also this end loop for this cylinder in order to create a surface to join them together. So let's go ahead and do that. I can go to face select mode. There's many ways to do this. I'm going to do it this way. And I can hit the C button and I can select all these faces. And then I can say, then I have to right click, and then I can say select region to loop. And now I have the loop of the outer boundary of this region. Now, I can select this cylinder region very easily. Let's zoom in a bit. Let's pan a bit. Holding down the shift key and the middle mouse button. And I'm still in edge select. I'm going to hold the shift key down, select one of these edges, and then ask for the loop. Okay, so now I have both of these loops selected. Now I'm going to go into the loop tools, which you just enabled previously when I first started the tutorial. And you're going to open the bridge, and you're going to select bridge. I'm going to click on this bridge button right now. Boom. Now we've got a bridge between these two loops. This is fantastic. Now, the parameters for the bridge can be manipulated in this region of the window. All right, we want more than one segment. We want 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 segments is probably reasonable, and it's selected as cubic, and then we can adjust the level of the cubic in order to get the bridge function to work as we would like. So as you can see, we can combine these surfaces, and I think that I'll use this combination such that we get a nice smooth transition from the circle to the upper ellipse. All right, that looks pretty reasonable. Perhaps we use fewer segments. This is probably good. And the cubicity tells us how the bridge shape is going to look. Okay, so now we have a basic implant shape. Okay, now that we have our basic shape, I'm going to use some tools to try and smooth out the transition from the loop plane to the circular plane, which means I'm going to have to hit Control R. I'm in edit mode. Hit Control R on one of these edges. Control R. And I'll add a loop. Click it. And now I can size that loop using the scale key. And you have to be quite careful here. So I'm going to add a loop there. And I'm also going to add a loop. I'm going to hit the A button, deselect, and I'm going to add another loop in this region. Control R. Left click. I'm going to add a loop here. And my goal is to select this loop. So in this projection mode, I'm going to select that loop. I'm going to create quite an orthogonal view. Hit the A button, and I'm in edge select mode. I'm going to hit the B button, and I'm going to select this loop of edges. And I'm going to hit the S button for scaling. I'm going to scale it up very carefully. I might want to zoom in to do this. Let's zoom in. Hit the S button for scaling, and I'm going to scale it such that I get a pretty even curvature. All right. I'm going to move it over just a bit. And now I have a pretty smooth transition from the upper part of the implant to the cylinder. Okay. Now what we're going to do is we're going to taper the cylinder, because obviously we don't want the cylinder to be this thick the entire way down the shaft. We want the cylinder to be tapered in some sense. So I will orient myself into a view where I can select. I'll hit the A button to deselect all. Orient myself into a view. And what I'm interested in is this edge, and these further edges. Okay, in order to make this taper, we're going to have to select some loops and do some scaling. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go into edge mode and select one of these edges, select the loop, and we'll scale it down a very small amount. That's fine. And now the rest of this object we would like to scale a little bit more. So let's hit the A button to unselect. And then what we're going to do is we're going to select the faces of the end of this object. So let's go ahead and click on face select, hit the B button, select these faces, and now we're going to scale these faces down. And we're going to scale them to the extent that we would like to have a taper for this implant. Okay, now I think that we have a reasonable taper for the implant. If I hit the A button, we can deselect all. If you want to look at the mesh, it's easy to do. We go to the edge option, and we can see the mesh for this implant. And I think that the taper here is, or the transition is probably not. I think that this taper is a little bit too abrupt, so I'm going to adjust that a bit. And so we'll have to select a loop here, edge select this loop. How about this loop to start out with? And select loop. And scale. And we'll increase its scale just a little bit. If you want to scale in finer increments, hold the Shift key down, and then you can scale very finely. Okay, that looks pretty good. Let's select this loop. And I'm going to scale it, S for scale, hold the Shift key down, I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. Very small adjustment there. And I'm going to select this loop. And I'm going to make it a little bit bigger. S for scale, hold the Shift key down, and I'm going to make it just a little bit bigger. Okay, so now we have, I'm going to scroll out, and now we have a fairly smooth transition between the shaft and the upper part of the implant. Hit the A button to unselect all. Let's hit the Tab button, which goes back to object mode automatically. Hit the Z button so we can see the object, and it looks like we've got a reasonably good initial approximation of the implant. Okay, great. Okay, so I have my basic implant shape, but I can see that there's a few anomalies here. I mean, this scaling, it appears to be a little bit too much. I still am not too satisfied. There's a little bit of the transition is not very smooth. So what we can do is use a modifier on this object. Because what we actually want is we want this to be smooth, a smooth surface that we can use for manufacturing. So let us add a modifier to this, and we're going to add the smooth modifier, but we have to be very careful. Using the smooth modifier, what we want to do is we want to try and remove any of these local protuberances, and we can use the repeat key or the repeat parameter a couple times, and then increase the smooth factor some. But you have to be really careful, because if you smooth too much or too little, then the object becomes distorted. So you find a happy medium. This is the original. I'm going to smooth it about this much. And now I have a very smoothly transitioning surface. 1.3 is reasonably good. And so now I have the implant, the shaft, and that also helps to smooth the lower portion of the surface as well. Okay. I'm going to apply this modifier, and that's done. I'll hit the Z key so I can look at a little bit of the mesh. And I can see that I have now created a relatively finely tuned implant with smooth surfaces all around. Okay, we've got a pretty good implant basic configuration. I'm not quite happy about this transition in this region. It's a little bit too abrupt. So once again, we'll go ahead and in edit mode, hit Control R, and we'll add another loop region. How about right here? So now we have a new loop. And hit the A button, deselect all. In edge mode, we'll select this edge and select loop, edge loop. Maybe we'll zoom in a bit so we can see what we're doing. And we want to scale it, scale it out a little bit. All right, let's select this edge loop. And this is how we kind of tweak the model so that we really get what we want. Scale, edge. Oh, I better hold the shift key down so I can scale it and fine tune it. And that looks pretty good. And now I have a really nice smooth transition from the upper part of the model to the shaft. Hit the A button, and note that I had proportional editing on while I was doing that. So you saw that the adjacent cells moved along with the local plane. So now we have a really nice smoothly transitioned model. Let's say I want to smooth it even more. So let's go ahead and select. Let's say that this is a little bit too high of a crease in this region. Let's go ahead and select some of these faces, or some of these edges, and then do an additional proportional editing. All right. So in order to do that, we will zoom in, use the shift key to pan, and you see there's a little crease here. I'm not really happy with that. Let's select these edges. Shift, 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 shift. Okay, now we've selected those edges, and with proportional editing enabled, we will move these edges out a little bit, and that really helps us out. Now we have a very nice smooth surface transition from shaft to implant. Okay, so I can move it out more, and with the proportional editing, if I want to change the, I'm hitting Control Z now. If I want to change the size of the proportional editing while I'm holding down the left button, I'm scrolling with the mouse wheel. This is how you change the radius of the proportional editing. Okay, that looks pretty good. And so I've removed that little crease, and I think it looks really nice at this point. I have a very nice smooth transition from shaft to implant, or shaft to proximal part of the implant. Okay, so now that we have a really nicely designed implant, we would like to probably add the tapered cylindrical shaft that will hold the implant head. So it's going to take quite a bit of detail, and this is kind of a complex set of operations that we're going to have to do in order to add this shaft. So first what we're going to do is we're going to select a loop region and delete the faces of the end of this implant. So let's go ahead and do that now. We're in Edge Select Edit mode. Select one edge and try and obtain a loop region, but we won't get the whole loop. As you can see, we only get one part of it. So let's hold the Shift key down, select another edge, and then select loop. Oh, and you get some more. That's good. Hold the Shift key down, select another edge, select edge loop. Oh, and now we've got more, but not all of it. So we've got to reorient. Hold the Shift key down, select another edge, and then select edge loop. So we've guided this edge loop selector so that now we have an edge loop. Now, what we want to do is we actually want to delete all these faces. So let's go select, loop to region. And now we have selected the region that we want to delete. Hit the X button, delete faces. And now we've deleted all the faces on the end of the implant. Okay, that's great. Now, we want to add a cylindrical object that will form the femoral neck. So let's go ahead and add a cylinder, but before we do that, we better get out of edit mode. We want to do this in object mode. And add cylinder. There's multiple ways actually to do this, but this is a convenient way. We know that the angle of this is 30 degrees, so let's go ahead and rotate this by 30 degrees. And now we have a cylinder that's rotated by 30 degrees. And we'd like to move it into position. In order to do that, we shouldn't use global coordinates, we should use local coordinates. See that? Now we can move it into position. The Y position will be 0. So that's perfectly oriented with the rest of the implant. Let's scale it a bit. We can reposition it along the Z axis, and perhaps a little bit along the X axis. And now we have a cylinder. So what are we going to do with this? We want to taper it. So let's go into edit mode. And we want to select the top loop of the cylinder. Zooming in, I'm now going to hold the control key or the shift key and pan. Select an edge of the top of the cylinder. Select the loop region. And we want to scale so we can achieve a taper of some sort. We don't really need this proportional editing on right now, so we'll convert it to disable. And now we have kind of a cylinder here. Perhaps we want to scale in the Z direction. So in order to elongate it along its local Z axis, we hit the S button for scale. And then we hit the Z button once, but then we have to hit the Z button again, twice. Okay, so now we can elongate this along its local Z axis. I think that's probably reasonable. All right. Now, I'm going to hit the A button, and I'm going to hit the G button to grab it. I'm going to hit the A button again, and then I'm going to drag it up a little bit. And what we want to do is we want to connect this surface with this surface so that it's one uniform surface. So in order to do that, we hit the A button. But first what we have to do is we have to join these two objects together as if they're one object. And we also need to remove these faces of the object because we don't want to have a solid face inside the object. All right? So that's not too hard. We can zoom in, hit the Shift key, pan around, hit the A key, and I want to select these faces and delete them. So I'm going to hit the C key. I should be selecting faces. C means, I don't know. All right, I'm going to delete these faces. Hit the X button. First, I have to right-click to get out of the C mode. Crayon, color, whatever it is. And I'm going to delete these faces, but I'm only going to delete the faces. Actually, I'll just delete the faces. Okay, so I deleted the faces, and now I have a hollow object, which I'm going to mate with this hollow object, which is the proximal femoral implant. But first we have to join them together. So I'm going to go back to object mode, and I'm going to select this. This object is already selected. I'm going to shift select this object, right click, and now we're going to join them together as one object. But note that I'm joining the objects in a certain fashion. In other words, I'm joining, this is the main object. I've selected it the second, and this is the sub-object. So, but that's okay. Join, and now they're one. So now I can go in and select the two loop regions, and then I can blend them together. All right, let's go ahead and do that. Let's go into edit mode, and I want to select the two loops here. That's not too hard. Let's go for edge. Right click, select an edge, select edge loop. I've got that loop. Now I'm going to shift, select, shift, right click to select that edge, and then ask for the edge loop of there. And now I'm going to join them together. I'm going to use the loop tools again, the bridge tool. Segment 7, we only need probably 3. And now we join those together. Fantastic. I'll hit the A button, and now we have one single joined object. Fantastic. And that's about it. I'm holding the Shift key down to pan, and as you can see, now we have one single joined object. I can manipulate this object any way I want. I can, for instance, select the faces of the cylinder here. And I'll go ahead and do that with the B key in face select mode, B. And I can move them. Oh, but I only selected the front faces. Hit the A key. Let's hit this button, which selects everything in the view. Hit the B key. Okay, now I've selected everything. You see that? And I can now move that, and the appropriate edges of the implant will move to accommodate wherever I want to reposition. If I would like to reposition the femoral neck, I can rescale it. I can do anything I want. I can hit the S button and scale it, and everything will follow accordingly. I can use proportional editing, and then when I move things, the relative objects will move as well. I can increase the radius of the proportional editing, and the whole implant will move. All the vertices will move accordingly. Obviously, we don't really want to do that, but it can be done. Control Z, undo. And that's it, folks. I have created an implant which can be used for CAD design or importing into other computer-aided design modeling software, or used as a used for further simulation. I can adjust the taper very easily. All I have to do is just select these faces, or actually these edges and these faces. I can adjust the taper if I want. I've selected those faces, scale them. And obviously my radius is very high, so I'm manipulating the entire object, but I can reduce the radius. And I can adjust the taper size if I want. Pretty much do anything you want. And I think that looks pretty much like an implant. And all you have to do is get to know it a little bit, and you'll be running with the wolves. Okay, well that's it for this tutorial. I hope it's informative for you for creating objects of your own with the tools that are available in Blender. Fantastic.